Today's session is part 4 of our TIA Deep Dive series. Today we're going to be talking about pulling all the pieces together and getting prepared for that reporting that will happen in the fall. So wrapping up your year is our topic for today. My name is Paige Parker, and I'm one of the training and implementation specialists here at Eduphoria. I work primarily with Strive and TIA, but I also do some things with our logistical apps. Today's topics or our agenda, we're going to review the data and the setup to make sure that everything goes into the report smoothly. We're going to look at some user details that you can add in. We're going to look at the Student Growth Manager, where you put your student growth scores. We're going to talk about running that correlation report and also running the TIA report and getting all those final details in there that you need to have before you submit. All right, let's get started. We're going to start by reviewing the settings. And one of the questions to ask is maybe after this webinar is, are you aligned to your application? So if you're not the person who wrote your application, but you are the person pulling the data, I would make sure I have that conversation and know what did we say in our application that we were going to use, because that's what's going to determine the settings that we look at right now. So I want to start at the very top by saying we do have a report that's going to pull all the fields that are in the data submission file. So it's going to be a spreadsheet that's formatted just like the data submission, and you'll be able to get all of your data in one place before you submit. So I want to show this up front. We're not going to run it right now or look at it right now, but I want you to know that it's there, because that's what's on the top of most people's minds is, how am I going to get this data in when it's time for me to submit? So we do have that report created. It does have some requirements, and we're going to talk about each one of those requirements today during this webinar so that you're ready to run it when it's time to do that. And you can run the report multiple times. So if you want to run it like early and just see what it's going to look like, you can definitely do that. It may not have all of the data populated in if you run it early, but you can at least see what the report's going to look like and kind of get a feel for it. Okay, the first thing that you're going to want to do before you run the report, before the report will be runnable, I should say, is you have to set your scoring in your process. So you're going to go to Strive settings and go into the evaluation setup and look at the appraisee type that you're using to pull your data. And when you go to that appraisee type, the first tab on the left in that screen says appraisee type options. That's where you build your process. That's where you put your steps and tasks and add the documents that your teachers are going to use or your appraisers are going to use as they go through that appraisal process. So that's the screen it lands on. But if you click on the next tab over that says scoring, you'll see where you're going to put in the items that are going to be used in the calculations for your district. So in the first part, you're going to select the document. If you said in your application you were pulling the teacher ratings from the summative, then you'll select your summative document there. That's probably the most common, but it's not the only option. You can also pull data from observations if your district put that in your application. So you're going to select the exact template name that you used from the templates that are in your district system, and that's going to tell the report where to pull that data. And then the second part of that is you're going to put in your percentages. So whatever you said in your application, again, what's the percentage that teacher ratings are going to count? What's the percentage that student ratings are going to count? And then if you do have an other percentage, you would put that here so that the totals add up to be 100%. If you do use an other element, which is an option, and some districts are doing and some are not. But if you do, this sets it up to calculate correctly, but this data, whatever it is that you selected, will not live in Eduphoria. So it will be one of the fields that you will have to add to after you run the TIA report. It will still calculate because the percentage is determined, but the data won't be housed in Eduphoria. So whatever you're using for that other option, you'll need to find a way to import that in, which is not difficult, but you'll just want to set up your percentages there. Okay, the second thing you're going to do is get some of those user details imported into the system. If you have looked at the TIA report, the submission file, then you'll know that it asks for some specific pieces of information. It wants to know the employee's TSDS number or unique ID number, and also their TEA ID or certification ID number. Those are required fields. The middle name is optional still. Date of birth is now required. And then that top employee ID, which is your district's local ID, that's optional in the TIA report, but it's probably the one that your district uses the most. So I would recommend going ahead and pulling it in. This piece actually happens in the management application. It doesn't happen in Strive. You have to go to management. So if you are the TIA Strive person, but you don't have access to the management application, you'll need to find someone in your district who can partner with you on this part of the job and bring that data in, or they will have to give you that system administrator role so that you can go in and do that. So it does live in the management application. There is a link down at the bottom here on this one that gives you all the information about going in and doing this. But you'll see when you come in, there's a link to an article in our TIA section of our online help guide that goes over these fields and how you set up your file. You can download a template here and delete out all except for the 9 things that we have recommended over here. The top 4 you have to include. That's how the system knows not to create a new account, but rather to add these pieces of information to existing accounts. So you have to have those 4 so that it knows who we're talking about. And then these are the 5 that you're going to want to add for TIA purposes. And so you can get your template, build it out with the data from your employee information system, and then you'll come back to this screen, choose your file, and upload it. And then if it's uploaded successfully, it's going to show here in this list at the bottom. You would not want to check this box that says send a welcome message to new accounts because you're not creating new accounts here. You're using the importer only to add in these additional pieces of information. Okay. The third thing that you need to do to make sure that you have everything ready is the manage student growth section. So you're going to enter your student growth information into Eduphoria so that it will pull into a couple of places. It pulls into the TIA report. It also pulls into the student teacher correlation report. So if you want to use that report, you will need to put your information, your student growth data here in the place we're about to show you. And then also there is an option for you to have that data display on the teacher's summative evaluation document if you choose to. So all of those three locations come from this one source. So the managed student growth is a tab or button when you go to Strive settings. You'll see a box that says manage student growth, just like when you go into Strive settings and go to your evaluation setup. It's going to be in that same location, but it's going to say manage student growth. It is available to appraisers and district appraisal administrators. So your district will decide who's going to be the ones putting in the data. Are we having our principals put it in for the teachers that they're responsible for? Or are we going to have someone at the district level put that data in for them? And then again, the data populates into the TI export and the correlation report. So that's where you want to have that information. You may be watching this little animation over on the side showing you somebody typing in that information, and they're typing in one percentage at a time, and you're thinking, this is going to be forever. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the fact that that's not the only way that you can enter data. There will be some times when you have like one-offs, and you might just have 2 or 3 people who are using a specific system, and it's not worth building a spreadsheet to enter those 2 or 3 people. So you might just go in and manually do that, and that is one of the options. But there are more. So as we said, this is the source for all of your student growth information. The 3 ways to add data are to manually enter, and we saw that before. It would be the boxes beside each person's name. There would be 3 boxes, and you would enter those percentages for did not meet, met expected growth, or exceeded expected growth. That's one way. You can also import data from student portfolios. So you can see here there are three little dots beside each teacher's name. And if you click on those three dots, you'll have an option to import from the portfolio. So if you're using our student portfolios that are a Strive Aware connection, and the teachers have completed that and put in their final ratings, you can import those ratings into the Manage Student Growth tab with those three little dots. And then the final way, and sometimes most popular, is to import from a spreadsheet of pre and post test data. So again, these different methods kind of depend on what your teacher groups specify, what is being used for each different group, and what's the best and most efficient way for you to get that data in for that group. So on the import side of things, when I come in to look at managed student growth, again, this little arrow at the top of the page is where I'm going to go to do the import. What would I do the import for? It can be any of these sources over on the left. It could be pre and post tests, data that you're getting from STAR, from third-party vendors, or even assessments that are created in Aware, which could be district created pre and post tests. It could be TEKS Ready, which is an item bank that you can purchase from Region 10 that has pre and post test for subjects that are non-tested subjects, or you can have imported data from any other source that you're using. You could also, if you are using VAM, when you get those results, you will probably have a spreadsheet reporting those results, and you could import that data in here. Or SLOs, again, can be imported either here or on the using the three little dots if you're using our student portfolios to measure those SLOs. All right. When you go to do an import, this is the screen that you'll see. When you click on that little arrow, you'll see an import button. The fields that are required show here on the screen as a reminder, and you can also download a template so that you have the file with all the correct headers to put your data into. Over on the left, you see a list of the fields that are needed for you to put that information into the system. And then there's also a link at the bottom to an article about managing student growth that will show you what you need to do to import that data in there. Okay, before we go on, I want to check my Q&A down here real quickly and see if I have any questions out there. And so far, I'm not seeing any. So again, please feel free to put questions in that section as they come up, so that I can see what I need to talk more about or what I need to clarify. Okay, I want to talk just briefly about SLOs in Strive and Aware. It is a collaboration between the two applications. The student portfolios actually live in Aware because that's where student data is. That's where the testing data is going to be. That's where the rosters are going to be for teachers to build their portfolio group. But it's connected to the student growth goal in Strive, so you can access it from either place. So I always say think of student growth goal plus student portfolio. So it's two different pieces equals the Texas SLO model, because in their student growth goal, teachers are going to put their focus area and skill statement. The focus area is really what becomes their goal in the student growth goal, and the skill statement, how will I know if they have accomplished that? That's going to be in the success criteria. It's also where the standards that are being covered by that SLO will be identified and added to that student growth goal. And then on the portfolio side, that's where the skill profiles will go. I understand there may be some changes and the initial is not going to be included anymore, but there will be a target skill profile that will be put in there. That's the rubric part of the SLO. That's where the descriptors will go. And then that's also where the student tracker lives. So one of the benefits of using the portfolio is that a teacher's students who are already rostered to them, all they have to do is select that class period or select that student, and they're already added into the tracker and tied to any of the testing data that's in Aware, so that you can pull in a test, and every score for every student in that portfolio will display as part of that portfolio. So it becomes the student tracker. And then those two things together meet all of the requirements of the SLO process. And we do have a link to an article there also about how Strive and Aware can meet those SLO needs. This just kind of shows you what I talked about previously in the student growth goal. This is where you would put that skill focus area, and then the success criteria is where I would put my skill statement. How do I know if my students have met that? And then these folders are where I would drill down and find the grade level and subject area and the specific standards that I'm using or working on with this particular student growth goal and SLO. So it starts with the student growth goal process on the Strive side. It actually can start either way. I can start by building my portfolio, but normally if I'm going through the SLO process, I'm going to think about these things first. So I'm going to start with my goal. And then from there, I can click and create the portfolio, or I can go into Aware and create it. So if I'm in Strive and I want to connect to a portfolio, if I'm starting it, I'm in my goal right now. I'm in the middle of my student growth goal. I've just written those parts at the top, and I want to create the milestones in the tracker. I would click here to create a new portfolio. If I had created my portfolio first, the tracker with the students and the milestones, if I had done that first in Aware, I could just attach it to this goal. So you can start in either direction, and you'll have the ability to connect the two together. And then finally, this is what that tracker would look like. I can click here to add, I can edit my student list with this little pencil, and I can add these students either one at a time by clicking on their name because I'll see the whole list of all of my kids, or I can collapse them down by class period and just add the entire class period. So if I'm saying second period is going to be the group that I track, then I can click second period and it'll put all my students in there. Um, the the items that have the dots are a rubric. So like this target skill profile would include my end of the year descriptors. And when I say that I'm ready to do those ratings, it's going to show me the descriptors over here on the right so that I can use this information to select the correct rating for that student. The ones that have scores in there are actually tests, data that's in Aware that's related to that student. So if I want to use that as one of my pieces of evidence, then I can pull that test in, and any student who took the test, this student was either absent or not part of my class at the time that that test was taken. They don't have a score for that one, but any student who took the test, their scores will be there. And then I don't know if you can tell because it's small on my screen, but there are these little comment boxes over here beside any of the milestones. They can be for the tests or for the rubric-based milestones, but you always have a place where you can add evidence or comments about that item. So I could say, this score is artificially low because something was going on that day. So I could put some notes in about any of these items that I want to. And then at the end of the year, I'm going to make my final ratings here based on what the data says. So that's what an SLO looks like in Strive and Aware. And then you can easily pull those into the Manage Student Growth tab to have that data there. Okay, I'm going to check one more time to see if I have anything in the Q&A. And I do. If a district is using STAR transition tables for growth, what would be the recommendation? Good question. I'm going to answer this one live. So if you are using any of, let me come back over here, any of these items, star transition tables or anything, I would say importing the data using the importer would be your best option. With star transition tables, you're going to have to get your data out and do some work to the spreadsheet before you do the import because districts have the ability to make decisions about how they're going to interpret that data. Are you going to count a half point? Are you going to count a whole point? So you will pull the data out, your pre and post side by side. You can do that either from the star table that you get or from Aware. If you've imported the data into Aware, you could pull in that star data into a quick view. Also have whatever pretest you use, like if you did a release star at the beginning of the year for your pretest, you can make a quick view that shows the two of those side by side. But then you're going to need to export that data, get the spreadsheet, and apply your district's method of determining growth and then import it into the Strive side. So there will be a little bit of work to do there. In terms of the third party vendors, they usually have a report that is summarized by teacher. I've seen it for some of the vendors. I don't have access to see that for all of the vendors, but I think they all provide that information to you. So you could get that spreadsheet that already determines the percentages and import it in. I will say that I know, or I knew, I haven't seen one in a while, but at some point when I saw the map version of this, they only gave two columns, the did not grow column and the met column. They already combined these two for you. In our system, it's designed where we get the three and we combine them for the TIA report. In from MAP and maybe from some of the other vendors, they might already combine and just give you the two scores. If that's the case, then you would just add zeros to your exceeded, because when we add them together, met plus zero is going to equal met. So it's not changing anything about your numbers, but our system is going to want that third column. So you might, if you get from a third party a report that only has two columns, you might have to put a third column full of zeros to make our system take it, but then the math is not going to change anything about your scores. It's going to be exact. I hope that answered the question. I have another question. If the student registered late and was not part of the initial test, are their students still added midpoint? The teacher can add students at any point. So they could go in and to their student tracker, they could go in and add them. In terms of your data that's coming from an outside vendor, you would need to have that information back and forth between you and the vendor to get the data that you need out of the system. You're going to use the students that are on a list that you're going to get from TIA. So you'll know exactly which students you need to include and which students you need to remove because they weren't there at the specific time that the the data was collected, and that's the group that TIA is expecting to see. So you will get that communicated from the system. Okay, I don't have any more questions right now, but y'all feel free to keep putting those out there. I'm going to start talking about detailed analysis, looking at the data and things that you're going to want to be checking both throughout the year and also at the end of the year. So detailed analysis is a really powerful tool that you can use to dig into your data and look for different kinds of information. Calibration is one of the things that it's really helpful with. So you can look at teacher data and look at results by dimension. One of the things I would say detailed analysis is good for there is finding any blanks or any duplicates or any other anomalies when I'm looking at that whole list of teacher data. I can look at school data. I can tell it to sort the data or group it by campus, and then I can compare campuses, look at feeder patterns, look at grade level groups. So once I have all of the school data sorted, I can look at a lot of different kinds of comparisons. I can look at it by appraiser. And so this is where you're going to look for that inter-rater reliability. Is there skew between our evaluators, or are they all applying the rubric the same way? And that's an important part. You want to make sure that every teacher's getting a fair shake because every evaluator is evaluating the same way. It will help you to determine your calibration needs. It won't do the calibration for you, but it will help you to know, do we need to be working on calibration at this point? And then by subject or grade level, you can look for skew as well. Are we evaluating the same way across subjects and across grade levels? And it also might help you know where you have some needs for staffing changes. Maybe I have all of my highest rated teachers at one grade level, and I want to spread that out so that I have a really exceptional role model and mentor at every grade level. And by looking at the data by grade, I'll be able to see those things that might need to change. And also maybe some training needs. So I can identify those things by using this tool called detailed analysis. So I'm going to look at a couple of different views. When you go into detailed analysis, you're going to have some choices to make here at the front. What type of data am I looking at? T-tests. What document is it pulling from? Middle of the year, I'm going to look at observations. End of the year, I'm going to look at summatives. I usually want to display the dimension ratings, but you can also display by domain or by totals. Sometimes I want to look at the teachers, which would be a drop down here, and I would choose appraisees. Other times I want to look at the principals, and I would say appraisers, or I might say I want to look at grade level or subject area here. This is where I would group by school if I wanted to do those campus comparisons. And then also I would choose my view. And we're going to look at a table score, and we're also going to look at a graph view. So you can view this same data in multiple ways. Once you make these selections and click the Create button, it brings you in, it shows you all of your choices here at the top, but it also gives you all of these filters down below. And the filters are going to let you dig into this data a little bit further. So I might say, I want to look at appraisers, but then I really want to look at one appraiser. So I could click on the appraiser button here and just select that person's name. Or I might want to look at it this way, but I'm a district level person. I have a feeder pattern that I'm worried about. I might want to click on schools and select only my 5 campuses. And then I would see the data for the campuses that I'm concerned about. So it can be you set your settings, but it can be you can dig in, go deeper, or look a little more granularly by using any of these filters. And you can have multiple filters on the same view. Okay, this example is looking at the teachers. These are appraisees. And so I'm seeing teacher documents. What would I use this for? Well, I'm going to look for blanks, for duplicates, any other anomalies, and then also trends. In the system that I'm looking at, there were 2 documents done for each teacher. So that would be the norm. And so I'm going to wonder, why does this teacher not have to? That's going to be my anomaly or the wrong number. If your system is requiring 1, then the 1 would be correct. All these 2s would be the anomalies. So I'm going to look at this and see, for because this is by teacher, how many documents were done on that teacher. And if it's not the correct number, then I'm going to want to dig in and figure out why. I'm also going to want to see, like on this one, well, actually, I don't see one that's like that. Sometimes let me say it this way. Usually, almost always, when you have more than one document, you will see fractions because it's an average of 2 different scores. If I see one that had 2 documents, but all whole numbers, I'm going to want to open that up. And this is one right here. It says 2, but there are no fractions showing at all. I'm going to want to open up that document and see. I'm going to bet one of them's blank because it's not pulling in 2 different scores and averaging them together. It's very rare that 2 different documents would have exactly the same scores on every dimension. So I can click on the teacher's name. It's going to show me the 2 ratings or the 2 evaluations, and I can scroll through, and probably one of them will have numbers and one of them will not. And so I would go back to that appraiser and say, you either need to complete that document or you need to eliminate it, delete it out of the system. So I can look for those kinds of things that stand out as being not what I expect to see in the data. And then I can also see trends. If I'm seeing like a lot of 4s and 5s, that may be something that I'm going to want to check into. But I can kind of look at those things a little more deeply. I can also filter down, and you'll notice in this view, I'm only looking at dimensions 2.1 through 3.1. It's really 3.3, but you just can't see my other 2 there. The screenshot's cut off, but I just have the 8 TIA dimensions showing. I did that by clicking on the domains filter and narrowing it down to only the instructional domains 2 and 3. So I can tell that filter is the reason why I'm not seeing any domain 1 here. If you want to see domain 1, just don't put that filter on. But I could also filter by any of these other items to drill down a little more deeply. Another way to look at the data is to look at the appraisers. So in this case, I am looking at different evaluators, and I can see the total number of documents they have completed. Now, when I look at Jason here, he's probably a second appraiser who only comes in if somebody has just, disputed their evaluation, and because he's only done one. Either that or he's way behind. But I think he's probably one of those evaluators that only comes in when called on. The others, I would expect to see a number of documents that aligns with their campus or the number of teachers I would expect them to be evaluating on that campus. So I'd want to look at that number. Are they keeping pace? Are they behind in the process. And then this is the same data that we would look at in a table view. I can just change it from a table into a graph. And changing it to a graph lets me see some things a little more clearly that I might want to look at with the evaluators to look for skew, to look for the need for calibration. So, statistically speaking, what I should see here is like a bell curve. I should see a little bit of distinguished, a little bit more of the dark blue, which is accomplished. The majority should be the purple, which is proficient, a small amount of developing, and an even smaller amount of improvement needed. I'm not exactly seeing that here with my data. I'm not seeing any improvement needed. And I'm not sure that I agree that there's no improvement needed in my whole district. So I'm looking at those ratings and thinking that's something to be concerned about. I'm also seeing a lot more of the accomplished than I would expect to see statistically speaking. Now, there could be times when that would be appropriate. But if I look at if it's a valid and reliable instrument, which t-test has been determined to be, then I should see more of a bell curve in my results. So what do I do with that information once I've seen it? I'm going to think first of all, are they applying the rubric correctly? So we might want to do some kind of like we do TEKS disaggregation. We might want to dig into the t-test data and say, you don't give accomplished unless you see this. So let's look at the actual wording, and it's going to be words like always, sometimes, mostly, rarely. Those are going to be the kinds of words that we need to look at to determine when can we give accomplished, when can we give us distinguished, not just because it was a good lesson, but because I saw these specific things at this specific level. So it may be, first of all, going in and digging into the rubric itself and making sure that everybody understands what it means to be accomplished or distinguished, what it means to be improvement needed. And so talking about those might be the first step. The second step would be to do some calibration activities where we see, now that we all know the rubric, are we all applying it the same way? So we all look at the same lesson and rate it and compare to make sure that we're all in line. And there are videos that are available online that you can use for those calibration activities, and they even come with a rubric, so you can have your appraisers rate the lesson, and then you can say, okay, here's what it should be. And let's see how we compare to the completed rubric. Some districts record teachers in their district and show those lessons to their principals and evaluate them as a group. Some districts have principals walk together into the classrooms and do the evaluations. Just know that I think if you're doing that kind of walkthrough with a whole bunch of adults standing in the back, I would make that a calibration only evaluation, and I would not count that as part of the teacher's process, because it's not going to be a normal lesson when there are six adults standing in the back of the room. So, but you can use all of those methods to get the data that you need to make sure that all of your appraisers are aligned. So these are the two views. We can look at the same data in both ways. So it can be a scores in a table, or it can be a graph like we're seeing here. In this case, we're actually looking at two different kinds of data and different from what we've looked at so far. So in the previous slides, we looked at the teacher's data, and then we looked at the data sorted by appraiser. In this case, we're looking at subject areas in this one on the left, and we're looking at dimensions in this one on the right. So just to show that you can see the data organized by different topics, but you can also see both views on any one of those topics. Now, if I was looking at a teacher, the table view is not really going to give me a whole lot of data, because it's going to be a, 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 a color of one item. It's just going to have one bar, one color. But if I have multiple things, then the graph view is more effective. But I just wanted you to see that you can get both of those views for anything that you're looking at, and that you can look at teachers, evaluators, subject areas, grade levels, or standards as well, as different ways to just evaluate that data and see how we're doing. if I'm looking at the subject areas, I want to look at things like this not set because this is where the data fills into the TIA report. So I have three documents out there where the principal didn't say what the subject area was. That's going to put a blank on my TIA report that I'm going to have to track down later on. So I would want to go in kind of throughout the year and look for these not sets and make sure that we clear those up as soon as possible. There are also times, and I don't see it in this example, but there are some times where I'll see other listed here. Um, other was given so that districts will have a way to do some specific things, but as a district, I would want to recommend that you determine we're not using other unless it's for this, and then communicate that with your appraisers. So if you see those others in there, you will know, okay, let me double check. Yep, they're following that the way it should be. The other one that I see here is special ed, and there is one that's listed as special ed, and that's fine. I'm sure this is a special ed teacher, but when it comes to TIA, it needs to align with what the students are being rated on, and they're being rated on probably math and reading. So when I was in the room, was I evaluating this special ed teacher as math in their math time or special ed teacher during their reading time? That's what I would want to select for the subject. Um, not not necessarily special ed unless it was one of those courses that's not going to be tested and the students are not going to be tested in part of the TIA system. Okay, so different ways that you can look at that same data. And then the last piece, this is a separate tool. It's called Document Summary, but it's a great way for you to get some trend analysis and also to plan. So the example that I have here, I have pulled from the post-conference document that where the appraisers identify the area of reinforcement and refinement, and it's showing me the percentages of teachers who were assigned a specific dimension for their area of reinforcement or refinement. So in this case, if I was live, when I floated my mouse over these bars, I would see a percentage. I would see a number. But I can see this is the area that has the majority of our teachers, and that is content knowledge and expertise. That was most frequently identified as an area for refinement and reinforcement. So I need to think about what I'm offering as a professional development team to help teachers in that area. And then I need to also look at what are the ones, maybe we're spending a lot of time working on activities for getting to know your students, and very few of our teachers have been identified in that area as that being a need. So maybe I need to focus less on that and more on some of these where the principals have identified that the teachers need to be working. So that's great data that you can get. It's a summary of all of the documents that have been done in your district. So it's not looking at any one person or any one appraiser or even any one campus, but it's giving me trend analysis that I can use to make some determinations about what I can do for planning, for professional development, and then also do I need some different kinds of walkthrough templates that will help us focus on those areas? So another type of good information to look at. Okay, the last type of analysis tool that we have is the teacher performance student growth report. And this is what it looks like. It's a scatter plot. This is an example of a large district. You might not have this many teachers in your district, so you might not have this many dots. Each dot represents a teacher. If I was live, when I float my mouse over the dot, it's going to show the teacher's average. Now I have filtered this down. If you can see at the top here, it's again only domains 2 and 3. So if I float over right now, it would be the teacher's average of the 8 TIA dimensions that I would see. And it's also going to show me the percentage of my students who met or exceeded expected growth. This data pulls from that managed student growth page that we looked at earlier. So after you've imported or entered your data there, it's going to pull into this report for that teacher and compare their averages for their students to their averages of their t-test ratings. And so I'll be able to see that information. I'll be able to see the individual numbers. I'll be able to dig in and see the actual evaluation document and look at the comments. So I can use this information to see how are we doing. It's also going to give me up in the upper left-hand corner a correlation coefficient for this data, and then you can look at that. It won't be exactly what you get from Texas Tech because this is a one-to-one correlation, and they do a 14-point correlation when they evaluate your data, but it will give you an idea of where your correlation coefficient might land in the at least in the ballpark. And they recommend or say that your target should be 0.24, and I can look here and see mine is 0.3 something. My eyes aren't good enough to read that tiny number. But so I can see, am I high? Am I low? Am I in the ballpark? So this is great information. You can run it on observations at the middle of the year if you want to, but you have to have student growth data in there. So that would mean you would have to upload middle of the year student growth data to compare to the observations if you wanted to do it mid-year. And then you would upload the end of the year student data and pull from the summatives to do your end of the year correlation. But that's another great tool to kind of see how you're doing. And even if you don't pull it middle of the year, to look at this at the end of the year and look at it over the summer and make plans for the following year is very powerful. All right, the final report. So what's left to do once we run that TIA report? There's a little bit more. So you're going to go in. Again, we looked at this at the beginning. You're going to click on the custom TIA report when you go to the reports section. Principals do not have this report. So only those in your district who have the appraisal administrator role will see this report when they go into the report section. So you will click on the one that says custom TIA report. Again, we talked about the requirements. You have to have those weights set up in the Strive evaluation process. You have to have your documents completed. So if we're pulling summatives, I have to have my summatives in the system. The student growth data has to be added to the management tab. And then those additional data, they don't have to be added before you run the report, but it's much easier to add them before you run the report than it is to enter them or import them into the report after the fact. So I would do that for convenience sake. It will run as long as you have your weights set up and the documents completed. It will run even if you don't have your student growth data in. So if you just wanted to sneak a peek at it, but you didn't have your student data in, it will run as long as these top two are met. And then as you finish these in, it will fill that data into the report so that it's less work for you on the back end. So once you run the report, you'll get this screen that has you pull the year because right now we're in 25-26 and that's what you're going to be reporting. But by the time you pull that data, it will be 26-27 and that's going to be the default. So you'll need to use your drop down and make sure you're selecting the year that you want to pull that data from, that you're selecting the framework or the group of teachers that you're going to pull from because that's going to determine your document. And then these are those settings that we put into the evaluation process. They will pop up for you to preview before you click the download button and download the report. Okay, I think I have a question that has popped up, so let me take a look. If you are using domain 4, so that would be the additional data. No, it cannot be pulled in automatically. There's not a place for that other to live. So if you're using that as your other element, you will need to pull that out of detailed analysis and then import it into the final report. So even though that data is in the system, there's not a place that holds the other column. And so you'll have to pull that out separately and import it in. Sorry about that. Okay. Um, Once it's in there, I'm going to want to review the data for a couple of different things. So first of all, I'm going to look, and this top one kind of talks about identifying information. Did it import correctly? Do I see everything that I need to see, or am I missing some things? So I'm going to look for the subject area. Well, first of all, this one is looking for the data that you imported in. So from those imported things, that unique ID number, the local ID is your district's. Unique ID again is TSDS. The TEA ID is that certification ID. Date of birth, those are all required fields. So I would want to make sure that I had done the import and those were populated. They don't in my demo site because these are fake people and they don't actually have those numbers. But this would be a red flag for me. I would say, oh, I need to go do that import. The middle name field is not currently a required field. It's helpful sometimes if you have people who have the same first and last name to have that middle name in there, and that's something you could do with the import if you want to, but it is not currently required. And then this box down here shows the subject area and grade level. I would want to make sure that that's been filled in completely. So I'm going to look for any blanks that needs to be corrected, but I'm also going to look for those things we talked about earlier, other or special ed. Are those things that I want them to look at? Is that what how it's supposed to be? And I want to get those corrected. You can look at it in the detailed analysis earlier on, but if I do want to review it when I'm looking at my TIA report and make sure those are all correct. And then I also want to scroll over to the section where it brought in those dimension ratings. Again, it brought in the 8 TIA dimensions from whatever document we had set up in our settings, but I found some blanks here and I would want to get those corrected. I need to make sure that all of that information is there. So these are things that I would just want to review once I've pulled that report. Then there are going to be 4 fields that you're going to need to add information to after the fact. So one is the that you might want to remove any users that you don't need to report. So I could filter, and I could filter by grade level or I could filter by subject area and only show those that are not included in my application. So I would want to filter out any groups that I've included. So if I've included language arts, I'm going to take them out. I'm going to uncheck them. If I'm using math, I'm going to uncheck them. So just leave any subjects that you're or grade levels that you're not including in your application. Then you can remove them from the list. You have to report all teachers that are in an eligible group, even if they don't earn a designation. But you don't have to report teachers that are not in any of your eligible groups. So you could reduce the amount of data you have to review if you take out any of those people who don't need to be in your report. And I would do that once I have my spreadsheet by filtering and then removing anybody who's in a group that I'm not reporting on. I can also add in that data that's not housed in Eduphoria. So we imported everything that we could. We pulled it from the documents. We pulled the import, we pulled the student growth data, but there are still 4 things that don't and can't live anywhere in Eduphoria. One is the proposed designation level. So you're going to have to, as a district, look at those ratings, look at the cut points and say, I think these teachers are going to qualify for acknowledged, these teachers are going to qualify for recognized, and then you will choose that from the drop down. Right now, the drop down includes recognized, mastery, and master and exemplary. It will have an acknowledged option in there later on. It's going to happen during the summer. They're going to add acknowledged as part of that drop down. So your district will put in your proposed. That does not mean that, like, if I said they were acknowledged and Texas Tech says they're recognized, I'm not holding them back. Texas Tech is going to give them the designation that they see from the data, and they do a more thorough correlation. But they want to know how well districts are able to predict. And so they want you to predict that. The second field that you will have to fill in is whether or not these teachers are still employed. They might be with you for the whole data collection year. Something happens, they have to move over the summer, and they're no longer employed by the time you submit the report. Hopefully, you'll be able to say yes and populate that whole field, and then just go and find 1 or 2 that you need to change to no's, but you do have to say whether or not they are still employed. And in your application, there's a place where you say what happens to the money if they're not there by the time the money is paid out. The third thing that your district has to do is put the number of the eligible teacher group. So if K through 5 math is all using the same measure and the same percentages, they can all be in one group, and that might be group number 1. As long as they're using the same assessment type and the same percentages, they can be in the same group regardless of grade level. So, or subject area. So however many groups you put in your application, that's the number you're going to put in here. So some districts only have one or two groups. Some districts have brought in all their teachers and they might have a larger number of groups, but you have to identify that by the teacher. And again, you can use those filters to sort and just show me all of my language arts teachers and I would put the group number for all of them. And then now just show me all my math teachers and I'll put the group number for them. So you can use your filters to kind of make that easier, but you do have to enter that in as at the district level. And then the fourth thing that you will have to add is the main service ID number for observation and growth, which is what is the number, your PEIMS number that you use for where the students were measured. So if it's fifth grade math, what's the service ID number for fifth grade math? And that's where you'd put that. Again, you can use the subject and grade level columns and either write a formula that says if it sees fifth grade math, put this number. If it sees fourth grade math, put this number. So you could write a formula. It'd be a big formula, but you could do it. Or you could just filter them down by subject and grade and put the number in for those that are in that same group. But those things have to be cleaned up by the district after all the data is pulled out. All right. I'm going to look and see if I have any new questions over here. And then we'll see if anybody has anything else they want to add right now. Let's see. Are there main content areas and main grade levels for observation growth pulled from the teacher profiles? No, they do not pull from the teacher profiles. Those things pull from the document. So if I said I was pulling data into the TIA report from the summatives, it's what the appraiser put in the summative document that will pull in there. So again, that's one of the reasons I want to look at detailed analysis earlier on in the year and make sure that my principals are completing that information correctly, because that's what's going to pull into the TIA report. It comes from from that document. You get the subject area, grade level, and the 8 ratings. That all pulls from the document that you indicated in your process. I hope to see you at our next webinar, and those in the future as well. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.